I'd like to bring the Carson City Charter Review Committee meeting to order on May 2nd at 5:30. Could we please have the roll call?
Chairperson Robertson,
Here.
Vice Chair Matoska,
Here.
Member Fagan,
Here.
Member Giomi,
Here.
Member Vitale,
Here.
Member Welch.
Here.
A quorum's present.
The third item on our agenda is for public comment, and the public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any item not on the agenda that is relevant to or within the authority of the Carson City Charter Review Committee. In order for members of the public to participate in the committee's consideration of an agenda item, the committee strongly encourages members of the public to comment on an agenda item during the item itself. No action may be taken on a matter raised under public comment unless that item has been specifically included on the agenda as an item upon which action may be taken. Do we have any public comment at this time? No. Item 4, approval of our minutes from our February 26th meeting. Do we have a motion to approve those or any discussion?
I move to approve. Second.
Any discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. We have 4 agenda items for the meeting today, and we'll start with Agenda 5A for possible action, and that is to recommend to the Board of Supervisors an amendment to the charter that states trash pickup is not required for Carson City. And that was proposed to us by Rose Stiha, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I don't think she was able to make it tonight. We got an email from her.
Is there any comment by the committee or any of the committee members?
You said she emailed, did she email something other than this? Okay, that's all I wondered.
You know, just as a clarification point, what we recommend to the Board of Supervisors, if the board then decides to accept it, it then goes before the state legislature. If the Board of Supervisors, if we send something to the Board of Supervisors and they decide not to send it on to the legislature, an individual on their own may take that forward, I believe. Is that not correct?
You can always, in your individual capacity as a
Correct.
member of the public,
Correct.
go to the legislature and see if you can get a bill introduced.
Because any change to our charter has to be approved by the legislature. So just a point of clarification. So
So just a note on that, Nancy Paulson, Deputy City Manager. On April 5th, the board voted 4-0 to, we're putting out an RFP and in that RFP, they're requiring mandatory trash pickup with some exemptions.
yeah, I'm aware of that. I was just about to bring that up, but thank you very much. So I, you know, if there's any comments by the committee, I would say that agenda item dies for lack of motion or action.
Well, unless you want a motion to not recommend. I'd be happy to.
I would entertain that.
Well, I move not to recommend to the Board of Supervisors an amendment to the charter that states trash pickup is not required for Carson City.
Do we have a second?
There's a lot of pertinent negative
I
there.
second.
Yeah. So what did you really say?
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion? Say aye. Any opposed? No. Agenda item 5B, to recommend to the Board of Supervisors an amendment to Section 7.020 of the Charter to include a clause wherein customer service ratings are taken into account in order to extend or dissolve a franchise agreement. And Sherry Powell is here. I believe you're to state your name, and then you can go ahead and make your comments, please.
Sherry Powell, Carson City, Nevada. The reason that I brought this to the charter review, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of benchmarking from other industries or other cities or counties that have included a customer service clause, either to extend or dissolve a franchise agreement. But I've been out and about in my community, and I'm in Southwest Carson, and I am continually getting approached about the trash not being picked up properly. And I've called, and there have been a number of service complaints, and including from myself, where I've had my bin out with my requisite 3 bags of trash, which I'm included up to 7. And I'll have one of the 3 picked up, none of them picked up, my trash not picked up. And it's a continual problem on our street. I'm off of Mary Street over on 5th. And so it occurred to me that we didn't really have anything in our charter that said customer service was imperative to keeping a contract with the city. And while I understand there'll be a lot of pushback on this, I think it is something that we could look into to include into our charter, saying that a franchise agreement won't necessarily continue if your customer service level is below a certain percent. I chose 12%, not as an arbitrary number, but as a number that was indicative of a smaller population and the number of complaints that I'd heard in my neighborhood.
Does anybody have any questions of Ms. Powell?
Thank you for submitting. Did you, so this is focused on trash collection, correct? I mean, that was your driving factor?
It was a driving factor. Sorry, it was a driving factor. However, I noticed that is probably something that should be consistently included within a city charter.
Yeah.
That we couldn't just choose one franchise agreement and say, nanny, nanny, boo-boo, you know.
Right, I agree. And I've had similar experiences with our current vendor, franchisee. Did you get an opportunity to comment during the board meeting when they were working on the draft RFP for that?
Unfortunately, I did not.
Okay. Those are the only questions I had.
I mean, my one comment is, just as a practical standpoint, I would think if I'm the mayor or a supervisor, when the RFP comes in from however many companies respond, I would think I would take that into account as to when Waste Management gives us another RFP, which I'm sure they will. I mean, if I was on the Board of Supervisors, I would certainly take that into account when I considered that RFP.
Just a comment on that, I think that, yeah, that they would take that into account, but as we don't have a requirement, I think that they could skirt around that issue and say, well, you know, sure, we get, because I've called Waste Management, and I've been told that the supervisor will come by and handle the situation. Won't see him. So I'm just saying it, you know, if there's no way to measure dissatisfaction or satisfaction, I don't think that we're actually going to be able to say in the RFP, you know, this is what we need. However, we are able to, and companies do measure customer service telephone calls, and they do that on their own accord, and we could ask them for those records.
Did I understand you to suggest that we have a 12%, if they're below 12% satisfactory, we would not renew I don't think I really like the idea of having a fixed number. I like the idea that you put forth of having a measure of their service record, but I don't think the Board of Supervisors should be held to necessarily accept or reject a contract based upon just a magic number. But I do think they should take that into consideration.
I agree with you, and I think that that may be an area to look into, and that's why I said I unfortunately hadn't done benchmarking to determine what levels other counties and cities used.
I you know, just for what it's worth, I would love to see something like this in the RFP and in the contract with the ultimate company that's selected. I know that the board asked in the RFP, because I was at that board meeting, to put in that the company that's awarded the franchise for trash collection has to have a local representative. The current company does not have a local representative that's reachable by us. But my general approach, this is essentially our city constitution. And for me, I don't know that something like this belongs in our constitution. I believe it should be in the RFP without a doubt, but I don't think we have the purview to say that. But it concerns me to put something like this in our city constitution. That's my 2 cents worth.
I'm going to agree with Stacy. I really like your idea. I think it should go forward to the Board of Supervisors, city manager, whatever. Should be implemented some way or another because I like the idea of the accountability, but not in the charter. I think it's the wrong place. You can't even adjust it that way, to account for whatever happens. So I like the idea, but not in the charter.
Any other comments?
I would invite comment from staff on if you know how our franchise agreements, if there's termination clause for poor performance in our franchise agreements, if that would be something routine or something exceptional.
At the time now, I don't think there's anything on that with regard to customer service, but with the new franchise agreement, we'll be able to work with the franchisee. I would suggest that Ms. Powell would, if she, I don't know if she already gets the agendas, email it to her. She can look and see when it's going to, because right now I think we're selecting the franchisee, and then that will come before the board. That would be the time to come before the board and voice your concerns, and that way that the board can have some say as to what that contract is going to look like.
And I think that's scheduled around November of when the final selection will come to the board.
Beyond that, though, I echo the other concerns that it's hard to get down to the level of a satisfaction, our customer satisfaction in our city charter, which is really more of the structure of how the city government is supposed to work. So if there were a way to fit that into the bid process or contracting process, it would probably fit better there. But that ultimately is up to our Board of Supervisors.
If there's any further comment, could we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, and
Or-
real quick, also, we could recommend to the city manager that when selecting the bids, that these comments come up and be considered.
Quite frankly, I think it should go beyond just the waste management thing. I think it's a good idea for any kind of contract work, that if they're not pulling their end of the bargain.
I agree with Judy, and I think we ought to recommend to the city manager that they look at making that a standard operating procedure, whereas any kind of bids we go on, you look at the service and measure the service and make sure that the service continues to be satisfactory.
So if there's any further discussion, do we have a motion?
Yeah, I'd move that we make the recommendation that was presented to the city manager.
I guess I would move to not recommend to send this to the Board of Supervisors as it's stated. Is that the way you need the formal proposal?
For the agenda purposes is whether or not you want
Okay.
to recommend to the
I'll
board.
modify my amendment, or amend my motion to say we go to the Board of Supervisors.
That it would go?
Say again?
That it will go?
Yes.
Okay.
Wait,
Let's get clarification on what's pending.
Yeah.
I'm confused.
Okay, let me restate it, back to square one. Okay, what I'm recommending is that this committee make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that they establish or consider, they'd have to vote on it, of course, consider establishing a standard procedure to include performance metrics in any contract that they're going to be letting.
So to be understood, you want to move this forward then?
Yes, but not as a charter change. I don't think we need to go to the legislature, something locally.
Could we do this?
And I think you can just, I think that recommendation is taken, and staff will take that to the via the city manager.
Right.
You don't have to vote on it, but you do have to vote whether or not you want to recommend to the Board of Supervisors that this be included as a charter change.
So
We need to vote on that if he's going
Yeah,
to.
I would not make that recommendation as far as the charter change.
So is there a second?
So would you make your motion, Judy?
Okay, I move to not recommend to the Board of Supervisors an amendment to Section 7.020 of the Charter to include a clause where the customer service ratings are taken into account in order.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion, please say.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, it passes unanimously. Ms. Powell, I think you've done a great job of bringing it forward, and I know these packets were sent to the mayor and all the supervisors, so I think they're going to be very aware of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your input.
Moving on to 5C, to recommend to the Board of Supervisors an amendment to Section 2.010 of the Charter to change the election of supervisors from at-large to being elected by voters within the ward that they are to represent. The mayor would continue to be elected at large. And this was brought to us by our own Mr. Vitale.
Yeah, well, let me make a couple of comments on it. First of all, I've been asked by a number of people, or we've been discussing this. This has been discussed for probably 10, 15 years. And I continually, in discussions with people around the area, they bring up the question, how come we do this? How come the person who is a member of Ward 3, for example, has to run throughout the whole city? My feeling of looking at it, frankly, I agree with the concept of voting for a person who is representing a specific ward to limit the person to be elected within that ward. And I agree with this. I put it forth because I very much agree with it. And the reason it makes sense to me is because it's consistent with the way we run everything else in this country. The people who vote our assemblymen our assemblymen have to live in the assembly district. The people who elect the state's senators live in the state. Those are statewide. Congressmen must be elected within a congressional district, et cetera. It's pretty well limited nationwide to the people who are served by the person who they're sending to that particular office are elected by that person, or by those people. And I believe, quite frankly, that one of the problems we have, I think we all want more people to be involved in what's going on in this city and in political events. And I think that by limiting the election of our supervisors to within the ward that they come from and that they serve, and have them serve that ward, not be elected at large, I think would be attracting more people who would be more likely to run. And the reason they'd be more likely to run is this. First of all, it would cost substantially less. Buying a lot of signs is an expensive proposition. It would take far less time. Walking from door to door is a time-consuming proposition, and if they only had to walk about 1/4 of the city, that would be easier. So if we're asking people to take a considerable amount of time out of their day just to be a supervisor as it is, but to ask people to also spend a lot of money, their own money, and usually it's their own money, I think we tend not to have the average person be interested in getting involved. And I think everybody should be involved in the political environment. I think it's important. So those are the arguments that I feel are important, and those are also the arguments that have been made to me as well. So that's why I propose that we do this.
Any public comment on this? Ms. Powell?
Did you know I was going to say something? Well, I agree with John, and thank you for bringing this. I also feel that because we do have such limited participation, that if we begin to shrink the number of people allowed to vote and participate in an at-large voting situation, that those numbers will get even smaller. I don't know that it's going to encourage people to go ahead and participate more, because a lot of times they never even want to come here. I try to get people to come here with me, and they don't even want to come here. So while I do agree with the points that you're making, I just want to also bring up the point that it may also limit, if we could see our voter turnout on each of our wards that our elected officials are coming from, we may see something that may be quite disappointing. In addition, because we are such a small area, small town, and especially on the west side, a lot of those areas tend to run into one another, the historic district with Southwest Carson, with the downtown area, and it may give the perception that we are trying to break apart from east side of Carson, or we're trying to create different communities that aren't joined.
Thank you. Any comments from our committee members?
So my concern with the ward voting only is that, as you said, we're a small town, and I feel as though ward voting will make the citizens of our community more parochial, more divisive, as opposed to more inclusive. So my concern is that, and for one, if I live in Ward 1, which I do, I would only be voting for 2/5 of the ward. I wouldn't be able to vote for all 5 board members. And personally, I want to vote for all 5 board members. All 5 board members are making decisions on how my tax dollars are spent, on how our community is run. So I feel as though, each of our wards only has about 7,200 people in it. So we're not like Las Vegas where there's, 25 or 30,000 people in a ward, where you can have, or Washoe County, where you can have a ward, and there really are differences, for instance, in Clark County among the wards. I mean, there are differences between what happens in the center of Clark County versus what happens in Moapa or Laughlin, where you have some real differences. I don't feel like we have differences here in Carson. And to me, we should be working as one community, not as 4 communities trying to get along as one. Further, I guess my real concern is that if in a primary where we have 3 candidates, it is possible under this scenario for about 4,500 people to elect somebody to the board. Because if you get 50% plus 1 vote in the primary, you're through to the general as the only candidate. So that would mean that someone would get elected to the board with less than 5,000 votes. I don't think it's enough. I agree that campaigns, believe me, are expensive. They are. But then it's also a measure of how willing the community is to support a candidate, and how willing that candidate is to support themselves if they're willing to invest the money. I think those are the notes that I had. I just think that, I want a system where all of our leaders are responsible to the entire city, not to a small portion of the city. I don't really want to disenfranchise, as you said, the east side voters, or the west side voters, or the north side voters. So that's my 2 cents worth.
I need a reminder, because this has come up before. In fact, I believe that my first term on the Charter Review Committee was 2014, and it came up then. And I was just reviewing agendas from 2014, and this came up, I believe, on May 20th of 2014. Did this go to an advisory vote?
It did.
Yes.
And
it failed.
Twice.
Yeah, it failed.
Resounding.
Yes. Do you recall the?
Yeah, I actually wrote it down. It was 9,600 no and 5,400 yes.
And was that in 2014?
Yes.
Or 16.
14, yeah.
And I probably am more of the sentiment of Stacy, that I think we see ward-only voting more often in larger cities. And given that this went to an advisory vote and was defeated, I don't see that I would take up a position that's contrary to what the majority of Carson City already voted on, personally.
Any other committee members' comments? Mr. Vattel?
No, I'll just go ahead and make the recommendation, or make the motion that we make that recommendation and get voted down probably, but
Do we have a second? You were making a recommendation or a motion?
a motion.
Mr. Vattel has made a motion that we move this forward and recommend it to the Board of Supervisors. Do we have a second?
Can't second my own motion.
Having no second, the motion dies. And just as a comment, I think every year I've been on the committee charter review, this subject comes before us.
How long have you been on it?
I can't remember.
I can't remember. Were you on last time I was on, Jake?
No.
Jake, I don't. It's been just about.
I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing it up. I mean, a discussion is always good, but, so, if the chair will entertain, I'll make a motion.
Please.
I move to not recommend to the Board of Supervisors an amendment to Section 2.010 of the Charter to change the election of supervisors from at-large to being elected by voters within the ward that they are to represent. The mayor would continue to be elected at large.
And we have a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
We have one opposition. The motion passes. Moving on to 5D, possible action, discussion and possible action on future agenda items and meeting dates and possible direction to staff on the same. As of right now, our next agenda, or our next meeting is scheduled to be May 16th at 3 o'clock in this room. And then a follow-up meeting, if necessary, June 19th at 11 o'clock in this room. Is everybody still okay with that schedule?
I guess I would,
If nothing else comes through, then we'll cancel the meeting on the 16th, is that right or not?
A point of clarification, if we do not get other agendized items, wouldn't we meet at least one more time just for public input or potential?
It looks like in 2016, you just had the initial meeting that would be like this meeting, and then I think the next meeting just went straight to the board as a status report and briefing.
Go ahead.
Nancy, did an advertisement was in the paper about submitting information for potential changes?
Yes.
And what period did we provide the public to?
I think I have to.
So my only concern would be is if the period was still open, then it seems like we'd have to have one more meeting. But if the period's already closed,
I think the period's already closed. It was
Okay.
closed, I believe, at the end of April, so that we would have stuff in time for this meeting.
well, then I would move we don't have any more meetings. And we go straight to a board report with the chair presenting.
Do we have a second for the motion? Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. We have our direction. Any further public comment for our meeting today?
Mr. Chairman, I think we should just clarify then, we're not having further meetings, and you as a chairman report at the Board of Supervisors meeting?
That's correct, and any other
Any,
committee members that would like to be in attendance.
but you will be?
Yes.
Okay.
If you need moral support, we'll be there.
And you will be notified so we can all attend if available?
Yes.
Okay.
And is there any preference as to what meeting?
So I would guess that we ought to just keep those dates open and available in case something comes in, so we can meet if we're necessary. Okay.
I believe so, John, that the,
Yeah, if somebody comes in with something before, or are we just basically saying this is it and we're just going to quit?
Well, the board could take up, someone could come directly to the board
Yeah, that's
at the
true.
meeting that we're presenting at,
That's true.
Or the legislature.
or the legislature
I see.
directly. So there are other opportunities.
But the
Yeah.
comment period for this advisory committee has closed.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
I would just like to thank Sherry and John for taking the time to care enough to submit stuff, regardless of whether it was passed or not. It's good dialogue, so thank you.
thank you. If we don't have any other further business, we stand adjourned. Thank
The
you.
last public comment? Did you do a last public comment? One more last public comment? Nope.
I did ask, yes. All right, we are adjourned.
Was that your